Imagine standing in just a glittering, ultra-modern city in the Middle East. You know, you're looking up at these massive skyscrapers that just seem to scrape the clouds.
Right, the classic postcard view.
Exactly. And you watch these huge fleets of tankers drifting through the port, millions of barrels of liquid gold every single day.
Yeah.
And obviously, the country's gross domestic product is just skyrocketing.
Yeah.
By every traditional textbook metric we have, you are standing in one of the wealthiest places on earth.
On paper, sure.
Right, on paper.
Yeah.
But what if all of that data is, well, lying to you? What if, mathematically speaking, that nation is secretly going broke?
It is, it's really the ultimate macroeconomic illusion. I mean, we are so heavily conditioned by financial news to just stare blindly at top-line revenue.
The GDP.
Right, the GDP, the cash flow. We almost never look at the basement, you know? We don't check the balance sheet to see what foundational assets are being permanently liquidated just to generate that shiny revenue.
And tearing down that illusion is exactly what we are doing today. We are taking a deep dive into an incredibly specific, deeply fascinating academic report.
Yeah, it's a great one.
It really is. It tracks the economic, social, and sustainable development transition of Oman. But before we get into the numbers, I need to set the scene for you, the listener.
Because the format is pretty unique.
Oh, it's totally unique. The source material we are working from today isn't some standard, dense academic paper. It's a rigorously formatted visual slide deck. And honestly, the design itself tells half the story.
Yeah, the visual aesthetic of this report is almost aggressive in its austerity.
That's a good way to put it.
It forces complete intellectual honesty. There's no hiding.
I want you to picture this. The design guidelines for this report are an absolute exercise in academic minimalism. Every single visual is set against a pure, blinding white background.
No distractions at all.
Zero. There are absolutely no bright, flashy colors, no neon greens, no vibrant yellows. There are zero 3D graphics trying to make a bar chart pop off the screen.
Thank goodness for that.
Right. And there are no decorative stock photos of, businessmen shaking hands or whatever. The color palette relies entirely on black, white, shades of gray, and very muted low saturation tones, like a dark navy blue or a deep dark burgundy.
Which means, as you said, there is nowhere for bad data to hide. If the logic of the numbers doesn't hold up, the whole presentation just collapses.
Exactly. And when a key data point or a massive turning point in a historical trend line happens, the authors don't use fireworks. They highlight it in the most stark way possible.
Just those simple little circles.
Yes, a simple 2D red wireframe circle drawn right around the data point, accompanied by a thin, sharp arrow and a really brief text label. That's it.
It's so clean.
It's beautiful. And our mission today is to use this beautifully stark, minimalist data to help you understand a concept that will completely change how you view global economics. We are looking for real wealth.
Real wealth, yeah. And to find real wealth, you really have to start by measuring what traditional wealth metrics deliberately ignore.
Which brings us to the first slide.
Right, and the very first visual in this deck just drops a bomb on the traditional narrative of Middle Eastern prosperity.
It's quite a shock to the system. You open the report and you're hit with this pure blank white background. On the left side, taking up a huge amount of negative space, is just a massive dark gray question mark.
Just setting the tone right away.
Yeah. And on the right side, there's a stark downward trending line chart. There are no grid lines, there are no traditional axes, just the plunging line itself.
Plunging is the right word.
And the end of this downward line is circled with one of those thin red wireframe circles we talked about. And the text explains that this line represents Oman's adjusted net savings as a percentage of its gross national income.
And the numbers hovering inside that red circle are, frankly, what keep development economists awake at night.
They are brutal. The data reveals that for decades, even before accounting for the damage of atmospheric particulate emissions, Oman's adjusted net savings wasn't just underperforming.
No, it was in a severe, persistent recessionary bracket.
Right, ranging from negative 10.9% all the way down to a staggering negative 25.4%. Okay, let's unpack this.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It really is. Imagine you inherit your grandmother's sprawling estate, and the house is filled floor to ceiling with priceless, irreplaceable antique furniture.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Every week, you drag a piece of that furniture out to the lawn, sell it to the highest bidder, and use the cash to buy incredibly expensive groceries, designer clothes, and maybe like a luxury car.
Sounds like a fun week, initially.
Initially, yeah. For a brief, shining moment, your checking account looks phenomenal. Your personal GDP is off the charts. But you aren't actually generating a dime of real wealth.
You're just liquidating.
Exactly. You are fundamentally, structurally poorer every single week because your underlying asset base is vanishing. But surely, global economists know this, right? How does a textbook wealthy Gulf nation run a negative savings rate of 25% without alarm bells ringing in every financial institution?
Well, what's fascinating here is the precise mechanical difference between gross domestic product and adjusted net savings.
Let's get into that.
Yeah. GDP is not a measure of total wealth. It's fundamentally just a measure of velocity.
Velocity of money.
Exactly. It measures the speed and volume of money changing hands in a given year. If you pump a barrel of finite crude oil out of the earth, refine it, and sell it on the global market, GDP goes up.
And the economy looks great on paper.
The economy looks amazing, but GDP is completely blind to the permanent, irreversible loss of that natural asset. I mean, the oil is gone. It took millions of years of geological pressure to form, and now it is just atmospheric carbon.
It's basically accounting malpractice. I mean, it treats liquidating your foundation as if it were pure recurring profit.
Precisely. Adjusted net savings, on the other hand, is like the cold, hard accountant walking into the room and saying, hold on, you made $1 billion in cash this year, yes, but you permanently destroyed $1 billion worth of underground inventory to get it. Yeah, it hurts. Adjusted net savings measures the true accumulation of wealth after you deduct the depletion of natural resources and the damages caused by pollution.
So when we see Oman sitting at a negative 25.4% adjusted savings rate in this historical data, it means
the country was actively liquidating its natural inheritance significantly faster than it was creating any new sustainable wealth. They were literally eating their own future to fund the present.
wow. If you're a policymaker staring at that red wireframe circle, that is a terrifying mathematical reality. You are essentially on a ticking clock until the antique furniture runs out.
You are.
But this is exactly where the narrative of this data becomes incredibly complex. Because while those underground assets were being ruthlessly depleted, generating this massive hidden deficit, the above-ground reality, like the human experience in Oman, was undergoing an absolute miracle.
A human miracle that is, frankly, practically unprecedented in its speed. You very rarely see a society transform its biological and social realities this rapidly.
Let's turn the page, because the next visual completely scrambles the emotional weight of this deficit.
It's such a striking contrast.
It really is. It's a smooth, ascending line chart-tracking female life expectancy. The starting point on the far left is circled in dark navy, and it shows a brutal, tragic reality. A female life expectancy at birth of just 37.7 years.
I want to pause on that number, because 37.7 years isn't just a sad statistic. It is a profound psychological cage.
A cage. Explain that.
Well, a society with a life expectancy in the 30s is a society trapped in perpetual, grinding survival mode. You don't have time to plan for the future when tomorrow isn't guaranteed.
But then you follow the thin arrow pointing up the steep incline of the trend line on the next slide. The endpoint is circled in red. In a relatively microscopic window of historical time, female life expectancy rockets up to over 80 years.
It literally more than doubles.
It doubles.
Yeah.
And the visual immediately connects this to a descending staircase area chart filled with light gray. This new chart tracks the youth dependency ratio.
Right.
The peak at the top of the stairs is circled at a staggering 96.4%. You follow the stairs down, and the bottom is circled at 29.3%.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to truly internalize why a 96.4% youth dependency ratio is a structural emergency for any developing economy.
It sounds incredibly high. What does it actually mean, though?
So the dependency ratio measures the number of non-working dependents, primarily children under 15 and the elderly over 64, compared directly to the working age population.
Okay.
When that ratio is pushing near 100%, it means every single working adult is mathematically carrying the total financial, caloric, and infrastructural burden of at least one non-working dependent.
Oh, wow. It's like trying to run a marathon while carrying another fully grown adult strapped to your back.
That is the perfect analogy.
You can technically move forward, but you are never going to win the race, and you are exhausted every single step of the way.
Exactly. All of your societal surplus, your healthcare capacity, your food production, your basic infrastructure is entirely consumed just keeping those dependents alive.
Right.
There is no capital left over to build a new factory. There is no surplus time to innovate. But as that life expectancy leaped to 80 years, something fundamental shifted.
Infant mortality plummeted.
Yes. Families realized they no longer needed to have 7 or 8 children just to ensure 2 or 3 survived to adulthood. The birth rate stabilized. And as that massive generation of children grew up and entered the workforce, they had fewer children themselves.
And suddenly, the marathon runner drops the weight. The staircase chart plummets down to 29.3%.
That plummet is the unlocking of the fabled demographic dividend.
The demographic dividend.
Yeah, the societal burden evaporates. Suddenly, you have this massive, energetic, working-age population ready to produce, to consume, and to invent, with very few dependents dragging them down.
It's huge.
It is a rare, one-time demographic window of opportunity that can launch a country from the developing world straight into the developed world.
I want to push back on the pure economics of this for a second, because we are throwing around terms like demographic dividend, but I want you, the listener, to really think about the psychological rewiring that happens here.
The human element.
Yeah. Think about your own life. If the social expectation is that you will likely die before your 40th birthday, your entire time horizon is intensely compressed. You are focused on the immediate harvest. You are focused on immediate shelter.
You're living day to day.
Exactly. You don't buy green bananas, so to speak. Long-term planning is a luxury you cannot biologically afford. But when that horizon suddenly expands to 80 years...
It changes everything.
When a grandparent actually lives long enough to know their grandchild's personality, suddenly you are thinking about decades of compound interest. You're thinking about the long-term geopolitical stability of the world your descendants will inherit.
That's a huge societal shift.
It is. The transition from a short-term survival psychology to long-term multi-generational future planning is the invisible force driving these charts.
It is a profound shift from a culture of immediate consumption to a culture of capital accumulation. And I mean capital in both the financial sense and, more importantly, the human sense.
Which is the perfect bridge to how this nation decided to handle that massive wave of new, unburdened workers. Because having a massive working age population, that demographic dividend, is only an advantage if they actually have the skills to build something.
Otherwise, it's a liability.
Right. If you have millions of energetic young people with no skills and no jobs, that dividend mutates into a demographic time bomb of massive unemployment and political instability.
Absolutely. A large workforce is just potential energy. Education is the specific mechanical engine that converts it into kinetic economic energy.
And the next slide in this minimalist deck shows exactly how Oman built that engine. It's a dual indicator slide.
It's very clean.
Super clean. On the left, we see a muted bar chart showing government education spending hovering consistently between 3.2% and 4.6% of gross national income. On the right, there's this incredibly stark, simple dashboard gauge. It measures primary school retention, meaning the percentage of kids who actually start primary school and stay in the system until the final grade.
That's the crucial metric.
And the needle on this gauge is practically buried on the right side, sitting between 98% and over 99%.
Wow. While the spending number is interesting, that retention rate needle is the real triumph.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I look at that spending number, around 4% of GNI. And frankly, it isn't wildly anomalous globally.
No, lots of countries spend that much.
Right. Plenty of developing nations throw massive piles of money at their education systems and get catastrophic results. The money evaporates into bureaucratic corruption, or children drop out after 3 years to work in agriculture or street markets.
Exactly.
But this visual shows Oman isn't just throwing money at school buildings. They are keeping virtually every single child in the system until the end.
You really have to appreciate the logistical and cultural magnitude of what that 99% represents. We are talking about taking a society that, not that long ago, was heavily agrarian, nomadic, and deeply rural.
Yeah.
In an agrarian society, child labor on the family farm isn't an exploitation. It is a stark economic necessity for the family's survival.
You need the hands to work the fields.
Right. To shift that culture so fundamentally, to convince parents to pull 99% of their children out of the fields and keep them sitting in a classroom for years requires more than just a budget.
It requires an entirely new social contract.
Exactly. It requires building paved roads across deserts to reach remote villages. It requires training tens of thousands of professional teachers.
That takes time.
It does. It requires a total collective societal consensus that abstract classroom education is vastly more valuable than immediate physical labor. Moving a national education needle from 40% to 60% is a tough bureaucratic slog. Moving it from basically 0 to 99% in a matter of decades is an administrative masterstroke.
Lingering, almost uncomfortable question.
What's that?
Well, they have this massive human capital reservoir. Almost 100% of the youth are fully educated. But what exactly are they training them for? If your entire national economy is just drilling holes in the ground and pumping crude oil onto boats, you don't need a universally educated, highly literate population to turn a pressure valve.
You don't, which means they were preparing for an economy that didn't exist yet. And you cannot participate in a modern, diversified knowledge economy without the physical, digital infrastructure to connect those newly educated minds to the rest of the world.
Which brings us to a visual that looks like it belongs in a Silicon Valley pitch deck.
Yeah, the S-curve.
It is a classic logistic S-curve. It's that beautiful mathematical swoosh that starts entirely flat at zero, suddenly accelerates aggressively upward in a near vertical climb, and then plateaus near the absolute top.
It's striking to look at.
This curve maps internet usage in Oman.
Yeah.
It hugs the bottom of the axis at absolute zero and then explodes upward to an astonishing 95.2% penetration rate.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, think about your own internet usage and how it evolved over the course of your life.
Right.
For those of us in the West, we had a very slow, agonizing, iterative integration with the digital world. We had slow dial-up modems that tied up the family phone line.
Oh, I remember the sounds.
Yeah, terrible. Then we transitioned to bulky beige desktop computers with early wired broadband. Then years later, we got heavy laptops and finally smartphones.
It was a gradual process.
Our society adapted to the internet slowly, digesting it over 30 years. Oman essentially compressed that entire 30-year technological evolution into a fraction of the time.
Wow.
They skipped the dial-up era almost entirely and leaped straight into universal, high-speed mobile broadband.
It's the classic development concept of leapfrogging. I mean, why spend billions of dollars and decades laying copper wire for landline telephones across a massive desert when you can just build a network of 4G and 5G cell towers and give everyone a supercomputer in their pocket?
Exactly. They built a hyper-connected society almost overnight. If the 99% primary school retention rate is the software programming the minds of that demographic dividend, then the 95.2% internet penetration is the hardware.
I like that analogy.
It is the immediate, friction-free network that allows those minds to collaborate, access global financial markets, and participate in a modern service economy. They have primed the population for the future.
Okay, so let's pause and summarize exactly where we are, because this is where the cognitive dissonance of this minimalist slide deck really hits you.
It's a stark contrast.
We have firmly established that the people of Oman are living longer than ever. They are universally educated. They are fully digitally connected. The youth dependency ratio has collapsed, meaning the active workforce is massive and unburdened. By every single human, social, and technological metric, this is a spectacular, undeniable success story.
It is a textbook victory for human development.
So why, when we look at the raw macroeconomic data, is the financial reality so incredibly dire? We have to return to the hook of our deep dive, that giant gray question mark and the negative 25.4% adjusted net savings rate.
Right, the deficit.
If the above-ground human capital is so incredibly strong, where is the wealth leaking out?
It's leaking out from beneath their feet, literally.
The next visual maps this leak in a way that is impossible to look away from. It's a waterfall chart that violently crosses a zero axis.
Yeah, the waterfall chart.
Above the line, you have these solid, dark gray bars representing positive national savings. It looks great. It looks like they're putting solid money in the bank. But then, cascading down below the zero line are these massive, dark, dashed bars. These dashed bars represent resource depletion and environmental damage, and they are so disproportionately huge that they completely wipe out the positive savings, dragging the final total bar deep into the negative red.
The visual metaphor of a waterfall is incredibly apt here, because the wealth isn't just dipping, it is pouring out of the bottom of the system in a free fall.
And the next slide puts a specific, horrifying dollar figure on that waterfall. It's an absolute value bar chart, and the numbers floating in wireframe circles above the bars are just staggering.
They really are.
It shows that in some years, Oman's adjusted energy depletion, which is the calculated value of the non-renewable resources they extracted and sold off, was as high as $17.1 billion to $26.7 billion in a single year.
That's billion with a B.
So what does this all mean? How does $26 billion just evaporate from a nation's ledger?
Well, to understand how 26 billion vanishes, we have to unpack a critical economic concept called natural resource rents.
Okay, lay it on us.
The data in this report indicates that in certain historical periods, these resource rents made up 40% to 50% of Oman's entire GDP.
Half the economy.
Right. Now, when a normal technology or manufacturing business reports a 40% margin, we call that incredible profit. They created a new product, sold it for vastly more than it cost to make, and generated new value out of thin air.
Sure.
But resource extraction isn't profit in the traditional capitalist sense.
It's not value creation, it's asset liquidation.
Precisely. Let's use a visual analogy. Think of the country's oil reserves like a giant sealed hourglass hidden deep underground.
An hourglass, okay.
The sand packed into the top half of the hourglass is the physical oil. The sand filling the bottom half is the cash they get for selling it. Every year, $26 billion worth of sand drops from the top half to the bottom half.
Right.
Yes, they have $26 billion more in liquid cash to spend, but they have $26 billion less in physical oil. The total amount of sand in the hourglass hasn't increased by a single solitary grain. No new wealth was created, it just changed its physical state.
Wait, let me make sure I'm fully grasping the severity of this. Once that sand is in the bottom half, once it's cash, the oil is gone from the earth forever.
Ever.
You can't put the sand back up top, but surely an economy can function by just utilizing that cash. I mean, cash is useful.
It can function in the short term, absolutely. But it triggers a secondary, highly toxic economic condition known as Dutch disease.
Dutch disease?
Yes. This is the mechanism that makes resource wealth so dangerous. When you sell $26 billion of oil, a massive flood of foreign currency enters your economy. This artificially inflates the value of your local currency.
Okay.
Suddenly, it becomes incredibly expensive for you to manufacture anything domestically because your currency is too strong. It becomes cheaper to just import everything from abroad using your powerful oil money.
So the oil wealth actively kills off your other industries.
Yes.
Your farmers and factory workers can't compete globally because the currency is artificially jacked up by the oil exports.
Exactly. Dutch disease hollows out your domestic economy. You stop making things. And because traditional GDP only counts the massive influx of cash landing in the bottom half of the hourglass, the government pats itself on the back for a $26 billion economic boom.
Wow.
But the adjusted net savings metric, that waterfall chart, looks at the top half of the hourglass. It sees the permanent depletion, it sees the lack of domestic manufacturing, and it recognizes that the country isn't actually advancing its total wealth position.
It's just treading water or sinking.
It's just moving money around, and more often than not, spending it on immediate depreciating consumption like imported luxury goods, rather than reinvesting it into new renewable assets.
Which casts that 99% education retention rate in a completely new, desperate light.
Yeah.
It's not just a nice social program.
No, not at all.
They are desperately trying to turn the cash at the bottom of the hourglass into educated human brains before the top of the hourglass runs completely empty.
That is the existential, high-stakes race of every single resource-dependent nation on Earth. Can you convert subterranean geological capital into above-ground human capital before the wells run dry?
But the physical depletion of the oil is only half the problem, isn't it?
Unfortunately, yes.
The next visual introduces the other half of this equation, and it's arguably just as damaging. We are looking at a single-line chart, punctuated with stark, dark dots to show the annual measurements. It tracks CO2 emissions per capita.
This one is rough.
It shows emissions spiking from an early baseline of around 7 tons per person, soaring up to a sustained, elevated plateau ranging from 15 to 19.6 tons of CO2 equivalent per person.
The most crucial damning element on this slide isn't the trend line itself, it's the horizontal reference line cutting across it.
Right, there's a thin, muted gray line running horizontally across the lower middle of the chart, representing the global average for per capita emissions. And Oman's trend line is hovering in the absolute stratosphere, far, far above it.
This represents what development economists call a double overdraft.
A double overdraft.
Yeah. Oman isn't just emptying its subterranean bank account by pumping out the oil. By burning fossil fuels to power their own rapid development, their massive air conditioning grids, and their energy-intensive water desalination plants, they are simultaneously racking up a massive atmospheric debt.
A double overdraft. You are literally going broke in 2 different directions at the exact same time.
Precisely. And we have to be clear, carbon emissions are not just abstract, feel-good environmental concerns. They are hard, compounding future economic liabilities.
Real dollars and cents.
Absolutely. High emissions lead to severe localized climate impacts, extreme, unlivable heat, and severe water scarcity. To survive those impacts, a government requires massive, unforeseen capital expenditures.
Like what?
Well, you have to build more powerful air conditioning infrastructure, more expensive desalination plants just to get drinking water, and stronger coastal defenses to handle freak weather events. All of that costs billions of dollars.
Right.
So the $26 billion in energy depletion is the immediate loss of a physical asset today, and the 19.6 tons of CO2 is the creation of a compounding, inescapable financial debt for tomorrow.
It's an incredibly sobering reality check. I mean, we've established the human miracle, the universal education, the incredible longevity, the digital connectivity, and we've established the massive macroeconomic trap, the resource depletion, the Dutch disease, the environmental debt.
The two sides of the coin.
Exactly. So the obvious question is, how do these two completely contradictory realities interact on a daily basis? What are these highly educated, digitally connected people actually doing for work every day while the oil wealth slowly drains away?
This is where we look at the structural transformation of the workforce. And the data here shows a radical, almost whiplash-inducing shift in how the Omani people make a living. The speed of this shift creates massive societal friction.
The next visual captures that friction perfectly. It features a downward trend line, very minimalist, dropping sharply from the top left to the bottom right. The terminal end of the line is circled at a mere 5%. Wow. This represents the absolute collapse of agricultural employment. The supporting text notes that agriculture now contributes an abysmal 1% to 3% to the national GDP.
For thousands of years, agriculture was the absolute backbone of survival in the region. To see it drop to 5% of employment and 1% of economic output is the death of an entire era.
It's staggering.
Imagine the generational friction. You have a grandfather who spent his entire life working the soil, understanding the seasons, and surviving off the land. And his granddaughter is a highly educated digital consultant who has never planted a seed.
Yeah.
The cultural whiplash of that transition happening in a single generation is profound.
And the following chart shows us exactly where everyone went when they left the farms. It's a 100% stacked bar chart, and the visual weight of it is entirely dominated by one massive expanding gray block.
The service sector.
The service sector.
The data shows that male employment in the service sector rose from 44% to over 56%. What's fascinating here is what is glaringly missing from these charts. If you look at the traditional Western model of economic development, like the path taken by the US, the UK, or Germany, a country slowly moves from agriculture to heavy industrial manufacturing and then eventually matures into a service and knowledge economy.
You go from the farm to the factory floor to the office building.
But looking at the stacked bar chart, the manufacturing sector is barely a sliver. They basically bypassed the factory floor entirely. They went straight from the farm to the office.
Is that actually a viable economic strategy? I mean, can a nation just skip the Industrial Revolution?
That is one of the most hotly debated questions in development economics today. Skipping the industrial manufacturing phase is incredibly dangerous because manufacturing is traditionally the great absorber of low-skill and medium-skill labor.
Okay, right.
When you build a massive factory, you can employ thousands of people who might only have a high school education, and you pay them enough to buy a house. It creates a robust, stable middle class.
That makes sense.
The service sector, however, tends to be deeply bifurcated. You have very high-end services, finance, software engineering, specialized medicine, which require intense elite education. And then you have low-end services, retail, hospitality, driving taxis.
And if you don't have a manufacturing base to catch the people in the middle, a huge portion of your demographic dividend either gets trapped in those low-end service jobs or they get absorbed into bloated artificial government bureaucracies just to keep the official unemployment numbers looking good.
Exactly. And the profound vulnerability of skipping that manufacturing phase becomes glaringly, uncomfortably obvious when we look at how this specific economic structure impacts women.
Which brings us to a visual that I think is the most arresting chart in the entire deck. It uses what's called a dumbbell chart.
Oh, yeah, the dumbbell chart.
Imagine two dots connected by a horizontal line, like a weightlifter's dumbbell. This type of chart is used specifically to highlight severe disparity, and the disparity here is massive. We already know from the earlier data that female life expectancy is over 80, and female primary education retention is near 100%. Women in Oman are highly educated and living long, healthy lives. But this dumbbell chart maps female employment by sector.
And the polarization it reveals is extreme.
One dot of the dumbbell sits way, way over on the right side of the chart. An astonishing 94% of all employed women are concentrated exclusively in the service sector.
94%.
The other dot sits way over on the left side. Female participation in the industrial manufacturing sector hovers at a mere 5% to 13%.
This raises an important question. What happens when you produce an entire generation of highly educated, capable women, but your economy is structured so poorly that it only creates one narrow, highly specific corridor of jobs for them?
You get a massive bottleneck. You have all this human capital trying to squeeze through one door.
Exactly. A 94% concentration in any single sector is a terrifying structural vulnerability. And we have to look closer at what the service sector actually means in resource-rich Gulf nations.
What does it mean?
Well, for citizens, services often translates heavily to public administration, government desk jobs, teaching in state-funded schools, administrative roles in public health care.
Okay.
These are absolutely vital societal roles, but mathematically, they're cost centers for the government. They do not generate external revenue.
Right. They aren't bringing new money into the country.
The lack of industrial diversification, the sheer lack of private sector manufacturing or engineering hubs means that this newly minted, brilliant female human capital is economically tracked. If the global price of oil crashes and the government suddenly has to cut the public payroll to survive, 94% of the female workforce is directly, instantly exposed to that shock.
It's a terrifying lack of diversification. I mean, if your entire personal retirement portfolio was 94% invested in a single tech stock, any financial advisor would tell you that you are courting total disaster.
They think you're crazy.
You need bonds, you need real estate, you need index funds. Oman's female labor force is entirely undiversified.
And that lack of economic diversification isn't just a localized labor issue. It manifests in the literal physical goods the country relies on to survive day to day. Which brings us to the macro vulnerabilities outlined in the next phase of the data.
Right, because if you don't have a manufacturing sector absorbing your labor force, it also means you aren't actually making anything physical. The next visual illustrates this with a shaded area chart.
Let's see it.
There is a rigid horizontal threshold line drawn across the upper quadrant of the chart at 70%. The shaded area, which represents Oman's manufactured imports, consistently pushes up against and crosses that 70% line, fluctuating tightly between 67% and 80% of all goods imported into the country.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the ultimate definition of structural economic hollowing out.
Hollowing out.
Let's trace the life cycle of a dollar here. Oman pulls raw, unrefined energy out of the ground, the oil and gas, and exports it. Then they take the cash they earn from that raw energy and they use it to import finished, manufactured goods, cars, smartphones, heavy machinery, refined medical equipment.
They are exporting the raw ingredients and paying a premium to import the baked cake.
And the baked cake always has a higher profit margin. The countries buying Oman's oil, let's say Japan or Germany, are using that exact oil to power their massive factories, manufacturing high-value tech and vehicles, and then selling them right back to Oman at a massive markup.
So the vulnerability here is profound. Let's play out a hypothetical scenario. If the global price of oil crashes, maybe there's a massive global recession, or a sudden unexpected breakthrough in cheap renewable energy insane, Oman's revenue plummets overnight.
Instantly.
But they still need to import 70% to 80% of their manufactured goods just to keep modern society functioning. You still need medical scanners. You still need cars. Their purchasing power completely collapses, but their baseline import needs remain rigidly high.
It's an incredibly fragile equilibrium. They are walking a tightrope. To fix a structural imbalance this severe, to build a domestic manufacturing base out of thin air and transition a workforce out of comfortable, bloated public service jobs and into a highly competitive private sector requires immense bureaucratic competence.
Yeah, that's no small task.
You simply cannot execute an economic pivot of this magnitude without stellar, rock-solid governance.
Which is the perfect transition to the next visual, which tries to map the rules of the game. How strong is the institutional anchor holding the society together while it attempts this pivot?
The radar chart.
The slide uses a radar chart, sometimes called a spiderweb chart, to map Oman's governance metrics against the rest of the world. The data points show Oman's corruption control sitting between the 57th and 60th percentiles globally, and its regulatory quality stabilizing slightly higher, between the 65th and 72nd percentiles.
These are critical make-or-break metrics. You can have all the educated youth and blazing fast internet bandwidth in the world, but if your regulatory environment is corrupt, or if it takes 5 years of bribes to get a permit, foreign capital will not invest.
No one would risk it.
Local entrepreneurs will not risk building factories.
I have to push back here a little bit, though.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I am looking at those percentiles, 60th percentile for corruption, roughly 70th for regulatory quality, and frankly, they aren't exactly mind-blowing, especially when we just spent the first half of this deep dive marveling at their education retention metrics, sitting at a near-perfect 99%. A 60th percentile score is basically a C- on a global governance report card.
That's true.
Is a C- really good enough to engineer a total economic overhaul?
It is a totally fair critique, and on a purely absolute scale, you are right. But we have to heavily contextualize these numbers. In the realm of development economics, there is a very well-documented, highly destructive phenomenon known as the resource curse, or sometimes the paradox of plenty.
How does the resource curse differ from the Dutch disease we talked about earlier?
Good question. Dutch disease is specifically the mechanical economic inflation of your currency that kills off your exports.
Right.
The resource curse is much broader. It encompasses the political, institutional, and moral rot that usually accompanies massive resource wealth. Historically, when developing nations discover massive reserves of oil, diamonds, or minerals, the sudden influx of free money destroys the basic social contract between the government and the people.
How so?
Because the government no longer needs to tax its citizens to survive. It just sells the oil. And if a government doesn't need your tax money, it fundamentally doesn't need to listen to you.
Wow.
It doesn't need to be accountable. The wealth becomes concentrated in the hands of a few elites who control the extraction. It leads almost inevitably to kleptocracy, massive systemic bribery, and total institutional collapse.
Like where?
Look at the historical trajectories of Venezuela or Equatorial Guinea. Massive wealth, followed by catastrophic institutional failure.
Okay, I see. So the baseline expectation for a petrostate isn't normal governance. The baseline expectation is usually catastrophic systemic corruption.
Exactly. So in the strict context of resource-rich nations, maintaining a corruption control score in the 60th percentile and regulatory quality in the 72nd percentile is actually a highly functional, stable victory.
It's grading on a curve.
Essentially, yes. No, it is not a perfect A-plus Scandinavian governance model, but it is a solid, working bureaucratic machinery. They have the institutional capacity to enforce basic contracts, manage complex ports, and regulate new industries without the entire system dissolving into bribery. They have the bedrock required to execute the pivot, even if the building itself needs some serious renovation.
Okay, that context helps a lot. It's not about being perfect. It's about avoiding the catastrophic pitfalls that usually destroy oil-rich nations. And that brings us to the climax of this entire minimalist academic deck.
The synthesis.
We've looked at all the individual isolated pieces, the demographics, the massive education push, the severe resource drain, the dangerous import reliance. Now, the authors of the report force us to look at everything all at once on a single page.
The second-to-last visual is the ultimate synthesis of everything we've discussed, and it is a masterpiece of visual metaphor.
I can picture it perfectly. It's a stark minimalist visual of a traditional physical balance scale. On the left side of the scale, the heavy, sinking side, the text lists the anchors actively dragging the economy down.
The liabilities.
The $17 to $26 billion annual energy depletion loss, the compounding atmospheric debt of 19.6 tons of CO2 per capita, and that severe long-term negative adjusted net savings rate. That is the heavy weight of the past and the unsustainability of the present.
And on the right side of the scale, the side that is desperately trying to lift the nation up, you have the assets of the future.
Yes, the rising right side lists the human miracles. The 95.2% universal internet penetration, the 99% primary education retention rate, the life expectancy over 80 years, and that beautiful wide-open demographic window of a 29.3% youth dependency ratio.
What this scale represents is a real-time existential race against the clock.
Her race.
Oman has, to its immense credit, successfully taken a massive chunk of its finite subterranean fossil fuels and converted them into above-ground human capital. They traded physical oil for educated minds and digital networks. But the underground assets are nearing depletion, while the above-ground assets have reached their peak potential energy.
The hourglass is running out of sand at the top, but the people at the bottom are finally ready to work.
Exactly. And the final visual provides the roadmap out of the red. It features 3 distinct arrow-driven policy steps. It's the culmination of all the data.
Let's walk through these steps because this is the literal playbook for national survival. Step 1 is a direct response to the demographic staircase. Unleash the demographic dividend to build non-oil sectors. You have this massive, unburdened workforce. You have to incentivize them to leave the safe, bloated public sector and take actual risks in private enterprise.
Step 2 targets the import vulnerability and that terrifying gender bottleneck we saw in the dumbbell chart.
Right.
It explicitly calls to break the 70% manufactured import reliance by standing up local domestic manufacturing. And crucially, it mandates opening these new industrial lanes specifically for women, breaking that 94% concentration in the service sector. You simply cannot rebuild and diversify an economy with half your most educated workforce sidelined in administrative, non-revenue generating roles.
And step 3 is the digital play. Weaponize that 95.2% digital connectivity. They're the S-curve of internet penetration. Now they need to use it to export high-value digital services, code, software engineering, digital consulting. You don't need a massive physical factory to export an app.
Just bandwidth.
You just need a highly educated mind, a laptop, and bandwidth. The ultimate goal of all 3 steps is to fundamentally reverse the adjusted net savings deficit by generating massive wealth that doesn't require pulling finite resources out of the earth.
Which brings us to the ultimate question of the report. Is this realistic? Can a nation historically reliant on pumping heavy crude oil realistically pivot to coding software and advanced manufacturing in time to beat the depletion curve?
It's a staggering challenge. I look at this roadmap and I wonder, can you really code your way out of a $26 billion oil deficit? It requires a cultural rewiring just as profound as the shift from nomadic agriculture to universal classroom education was 50 years ago.
It's monumental.
But when you look back at that 99% education retention needle, you see a society that has already proven it is capable of massive collective behavioral change.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this isn't just Oman's story. It is the story of the entire global shift toward a knowledge economy. Every nation, every massive corporation, and frankly, every individual is facing some version of this exact transition. How do you move from relying on legacy assets that are slowly depreciating to creating new, sustainable value from scratch?
Which brings us to the end of our deep dives. We started with a blank white visual and a giant gray question mark about how to fundamentally measure wealth. We looked past the shiny, superficial GDP figures that blindly celebrate the rapid sale of natural resources, and we uncovered a hidden structural wealth deficit.
But we also uncovered the solution.
Yes, we uncovered how Oman has quietly, methodically, built an incredible world-class reservoir of human and digital capital to fight that exact deficit.
They have built the engine. The human capital's there. Now they just have to turn it on before the old fuel completely runs out.
It is a masterclass in reading between the lines of economic data. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a lingering thought. We've spent this entire deep dive analyzing the macroeconomics of a nation thousands of miles away. But look at your own country. Look at your own community. Or scale it all the way down and look at your own career. When you measure your personal success, are you just counting traditional GDP?
It's the cash flow.
Are you only looking at the cash flowing into your bank account today? Or are you actively calculating your own adjusted net savings? Are you spending your precious time building renewable human capital, learning new skills, building a resilient network, taking care of your physical health? Or are you just slowly, comfortably selling off your finite resources, your time, your youth, your energy, until the well inevitably runs dry? Something to think about.